excellence nationally and internationally. Actually, if you all forgive me, I want to...
You did that.
Beautiful, thank you. My apologies for not having that up originally. Mr. Hartman's work in the United States, Europe, and Asia covers a very broad range of project types, in all of which he consistently adheres to a rigorous modern vocabulary that acknowledges issues of place involving climate, physical, and cultural landscape, and historic precedent. The Cathedral of Christ the Light resonates as a place of worship, conveys an inclusive statement of welcome and openness, community's symbolic soul. The glass, wood, and concrete structure ennobles and inspires through the use of light, material, and form. During the dedication ceremony for the Cathedral of Christ the Light in September 2008, the Vatican's knighthood for service to society was bestowed upon Hartman by Pope Benedict XVI. Mr. Hartman joined SOM in 1973 and serves as design partner in the firm's Houston and Washington, D.C. offices. Was there before coming to San Francisco, where he has established the West Coast Architecture Group as one of the region's premier design practices. Mr. Hartman's work has been recognized with over 100 awards for design, which in addition to 8 national AIA Honor Awards, includes 2 Gold LEED certifications and AIA Awards for environmental sustainability at Treasure Island in the University of California, Merced. He also received a Federal Design Achievement Award in the 2000 Presidential Design Awards program. Thank you for being here today with us.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and thank you certainly Catholic University for sponsoring this event, and the Walton, I think especially sponsorship in this question of inquiry is, I think, particularly important. And thank you to you also who stuck it out through the best days, probably the spring, to be in a darkened room. So I'll try to make this brief. But I am coming here not as, I have no polemic to offer, and I'm certainly not coming here. I'm coming here as an architect. I am not trained in theology, and so I certainly defer to my predecessors whose comments I really resonate with, both Dennis and Duncan and others at this conference. But I'm going to simply share with you the story of making a cathedral. This was, for me, was and perhaps will be the most important endeavor as an architect that I will have had the opportunity to do. And so I approach this with a great deal of humility, of course. And also with the question of inquiry about how do we in fact make a cathedral today that will respond to the issues that both Duncan and Dennis have so well pointed out in the beginning of this last section of this conference. And for me, having grown up in the church, although not in the Catholic Church, as a Christian, and so a little bit of a disclaimer here perhaps is that coming through, maybe ascending vertically here, beginning with in a family of parents and grandparents who are Baptist, then college years as a Methodist, and finally adult years as an Episcopalian, just slightly below my Catholic friends. So there's still something to aspire to for me and my wife. But nevertheless, this was, so I say this because it was very important in thinking about the beginnings of this, about how in fact we get at something that does in fact honor the issues that both Dennis and Duncan brought up shortly before this. How do we make a place that really honors the 2,000 years of Catholic history and the theology that represents, and at the same time make a place that has a cultural authenticity for today? So for me, the question of light was the one that first became, for me, the real driver in my thinking. And this was informed by my own experience as a child, but also as a college student traveling on a shoestring budget throughout Europe and seeing the great cathedrals, and understanding that the Catholic Church has been, in fact, and Catholic architecture has in fact been, as was just pointed out, a search using the most innovative techniques available to the architects at the time for qualities of space that will ennoble, and also for the search, I would say, for poetic light. And light is, in my opinion, is God's presence made manifest, both metaphorically and physically. So for me, this was the great search, and became really the underlying issue, almost as important as the columns and beams that make up this building, as how can we find ways to introduce light in a way that will really inform sacred space. And of course also, you can't think about a building like this without considering history. And thinking, of course, about the things that, the buildings that influence us as architects in the lay public, thinking about, of course, Notre Dame in Paris and that great Basilica form, and the qualities it represents in our memory as defining sacred space, but also thinking, for me at least, even more fundamentally, thinking about the original San Pietro that in fact was a place in the city, and it had a place before entering the building that was about making a place of preparation for entering into the sacred space, and a place that really brought together the city and the church. And finally, even farther, thinking about what can we make that is the most elemental qualities of architecture that respond to the natural realm, thinking about the Vitruvius's early primitive hut, the hut in the forest, and thinking about making of a building of the most elemental of qualities that can in fact inform our thinking and the nature of sacred space. For me, I also, of course, was directly influenced by my own mentors at the firm I am a partner of, Walter Netsch, who is an architect who actually hired me directly from school as a young man, and his own work. There's no architecture that isn't flawed, but nevertheless, for me, actually, this building, as a young man, when I thought I wanted to become an aerospace engineer, visiting this campus, understanding I couldn't run a 6-minute mile, which was part of the determination, forget about the Air Force Academy as a goal, but the architecture of this place really spoke to me, and this cathedral, this chapel especially, and the qualities of light within it, and of course the icon has become. So thinking about this place today, we are not in Europe, we're not in a monoculture as perhaps the great cathedrals that we've seen in Germany and in France and Italy, but rather on the Pacific Rim, and we're in the 21st century. So what are the qualities that can inform that search for sacred space at this point in time? As Dennis well put it, I think the possibility of the eternal taking possession of the temporal and making that process evident. This place is Oakland, and you can see it's directly attached to the Pacific Rim, very much a part of that culture, and it's one of the most multicultural places on earth, literally a stew of ethnic diversity. And the lake you see here is Lake Merritt, and this is the site of our building, which is, you can see in orange there, just at the northern tip. And the length of the lake, really that long axis that I've called the axis of nature when thinking about this site, is the one that truly engages the site, the natural realm, if you will, with this site. And then directly on its western edge is the city of Oakland itself. So it's really this interesting nexus or hub between the natural and the man-made. Here's the site as we found it, a parking lot, again directly adjacent to the lake, and a significant place in size, but you can see also directly adjacent to tall buildings. So this was a new kind of a challenge to make a place that truly was of the city and yet of the natural realm, and it programmatically was a very, very diverse and complicated and complex program. It wasn't just a cathedral. In fact, it was also all the dependencies that make up the support facilities for a diocese. So the idea was to sell the properties that the diocese had sprinkled throughout Oakland after the 1989 earthquake, which fatally damaged the St. Francis de Sales Cathedral, consolidate that on this site, use the proceeds of the sales of the properties to help offset the cost of building this new complex. So the complex itself would consist not just of a cathedral, but also of diocese offices, a conference facility which could be rented out to the community as a revenue generator, a parish hall, of course, to provide much needed social services in the city, rectory for 12 clergy, a cafe, a library, public library space that's available, a bookstore, service facilities and so forth. So a very, very complicated mixed-use project. But for me, thinking about this place intuitively, it was a question of how do we reflect the qualities of the Pacific Rim, both the culture as well as the physical realities of the softness, the fluidity of the waters, and thinking about the earliest commentary in the Bible, in Genesis, that first there was light, and then God created the seas and the fishes within the seas. So the idea that we could somehow make a place that was referential to those elemental qualities, and actually make a shape of building itself that reflected the softness of those forms. This is actually the roof plan of the building as was designed, but it didn't begin with that level of precision. It began with a reflection on Vatican II and the premise that the altar should be one that is the center point of a community of believers, and that rather than in this case, in this interpretation, rather than a traditional basilica form nave with the priest and the altar at one end and the congregation and God above, this was really meant to be a place that was as inclusive as possible of the community believers about the altar, including the choir and the clergy. So it's not a true in-the-round cathedral, but a kind of a hybrid, if you will. So this is kind of the equivalent, I guess, of you might say, of an architect's napkin sketch in thinking originally about how we might make this. But I noticed, as in drawing these, that we could actually form this shape by making two great circles. And as Dennis pointed out earlier, the circle, of course, is a geometry we see in many religions, in many faiths, because it represents infinity, no beginning, no end, and transformation. And so this turns out to be, as we draw these two and bring them together, we can see that that these two form these great arcs internally here that can begin to form that shape I just showed you in the sketch. And at the same time, it's interesting, it also reveals a pointed ellipse, or a vesica Pisces. And this has been seen as a sacred geometry throughout many centuries of early mathematicians. So this became really the structure, if you will, a geometric structure for this building in this cathedral. It is interesting that you see these forms in other phenomenal ways. And in the center, of course, is the Ithaca shape, the shape that when one early believer in Roman times would draw on the sand with his stick an arc, and his colleague the other way to form this Ithaca shape, the sign of Christianity we see in the center. But also more recently, Hubble telescope photographs showing this, again, the star nebula, which come together to form this Vesica Pisces shape. So it's quite interesting phenomenologically, at least in terms of the geometries. You see this both in nature as well as in early Christian metaphor, as well as in the universe. So bringing these together and beginning to create a geometry of this, much like the Gothic cathedrals that Duncan showed us, was the task, is to find a way to give order and structure and rigor to this intuitive idea. So this is the plan, and you see the circles that form this shape. The smaller circles, which form the positions then that growing from the larger geometry, that place a tabernacle here, right on axis with the altar, which is here, and then finally the baptismal font, which is at this point, which is the entry to the cathedral itself. So the idea is to arrive at the building. You first observe and touch the point of absolution with the reconciliation rooms or confessionals directly adjacent and visible from that point of axis, proceeding up this main center axis to the altar, the tabernacle, and then a Eucharist chapel beyond. And the thickening of this, these white sections, are actually a device that we've developed to thicken this wall to make a great carved out possibility for a carved out space within which we can begin to house smaller side chapels like the one you see here in this tiny little section. So a series of these chapels cut into this thickened, we call it a reliquary wall, that will provide place for more intimate introspection, intimate chapels, and places also for art. So the next question was how to, like the great Gothic cathedrals, how do we bring this geometry into the third dimension? Make it volumetric and give it structure. So we've taken the two circles you saw and expanded them directly into the third dimension to make two spheres, and use the computer then to bring these together and cut them and reveal what is actually the exact precise shape as you go into this building of the sanctuary volume. As Bishop Vigneron calls it, the vaults of heaven. And so these two spherical segments brought together, you can see, reveal the Vesica Pisces at the top, and again celebrate a very distinctly Catholic idea of God's presence coming down from above into the space, and opening up at one end what we call an omega entry, and the other side, one side alpha, the other side omega. And then considering how we might then make this architecture, I had sort of an intuitive sense about the space that we should use wood as the principal material to define this interior space. Many reasons for that, having to do with almost the DNA of life, the fact that wood is something that comes from the earth, it comes from life, and is replenished by death. And it's a material that is very much part of the continual circle, if you will, of life. And it's a material that brings together, I think, us as human beings with the natural realm, almost in a sense of the DNA is almost a part of that material. And finally, there are other reasons, including the history of the Bay Area architecture, the use of wood in civic structures that brought those together. But the issue was then, how do you actually make a building can be wood and protect it from the elements? And so the idea was to create two conical veils, which you see in this computer diagram, that will be light veils, literally light veils of glass that will protect the wood. And this was an enormous issue. Even with this protection, there were many questions asked by the building committee in the beginning about, well, is wood really a material that we can count on for the next 3 centuries? That was one of the goals of this building, to make a cathedral that would last for 3 centuries. Of course, we have many examples of this in China and in Japan of temples that have been with us for centuries. So that was part of the rationalization. Of course, and of course we have ultraviolet filters and sun filters in the glass and so forth. But what really iced this decision, though, frankly, for the building committee was in 2001, when this building was in early design, and steel prices all of a sudden went triple and quadruple in price, and wood didn't. And all of a sudden, wood became a brilliant solution. And it was stayed with us since. So the massing of this, as I said, is one of a large facility, the cathedral occupying the northern end of this half-block site, and then the rest of the dependencies, the continuation of this. The original idea was to create this campanile or bell tower here at the edge that marks this sacred precinct, if you will, on the city's edge. As you come from BART, the metro system in Oakland, to this point, this would be a marker, much like early Italian churches, that mark the point of entry to the sacred precinct. Here you see the rectory and other facilities, but the importance here was to use this space then to create a zone in which we can have gardens that mark the public connection to this precinct. Another important piece of this was arrival and topography. There is a 16-foot, 6-inch difference between the city and the lake edge, which became important, which I'll describe in a moment. But part of this also allowed us to make this important point of ascension. We call it the Pilgrim's Pathway here, that connects 22nd Street to the plaza at the building. And this is a very important metaphorical idea about ascending upward to the sacred place from the city. And it's very much a part of the Catholic celebration of masses and procession as part of this. The bell tower, by the way, is something that is a future fundraising opportunity for those of you who are familiar with the way these church budgets sometimes work. So that you'll not find that if you visit the cathedral today, but hopefully at some point in my lifetime, hopefully we'll be able to raise money to do so. But part of this also was arriving at this plaza and allowing the transformation of your understanding of the building from being one of only external to actually seeing within, and development of this alpha wall, we call it, in a way that allows glimpses to the inside of the sanctuary as you approach it. So here's the view of the site plan and gardens next to it, the lake. And the idea first was to make these gardens that will extend the city into this place and to make it open and completely accessible for not only those who are coming to church here, but also for the entire city, to use the gardens as a place of contemplation, to have brown bag lunches, picnics, and to make it really very much wedded to the city itself. This continues with the main Olive Garden here at the center, a sunken courtyard, and then a sculpture garden on this edge, with the cathedral positioned to the north to allow light to really bathe these spaces. I mentioned 16 feet 6 inches. This is a number that's seared into my mind because it was really the zone within which we could place most of the program for this building. So the lower level, the lake level down here, the city level above it is connected at both points. This allows us to place all of these dependencies, and most of them at least, below this platform we've made, this green roof or green garden space, allowing the cathedral itself to have its own presence and to have its presence really significant and formed by these spaces. The making of the elements that comprise this are wood, as I mentioned, in the interior, which is a structural component, laced together with this glass conical space adjacent to it, and to use structure as kind of almost like a bicycle wheel, and using tensile and compressive elements that tie this together in an extremely lightweight system that allows this building to be extremely light and yet extremely robust in earthquake. So the idea was to let light come into the space in a way that would be perhaps not unlike that of experiencing a giant sequoia stand. The glass that forms the enclosure for this exterior is a tapestry of opaque, transparent, and translucent material, 10 feet from this point to this point, 5 feet. And again, for budget reasons, we've basically made this almost like a silk screen with ceramic fired into the glass that reduces the heat gain, but allows the light to be very dappled. And by simply turning the glass sideways, up and down, we're able to make a pattern that has an organic quality about it. And very importantly, allows light to actually strike not only the surface, the way we traditionally view architecture in shade and shadow, but actually to allow it to be transformative and translucent and glow as a lantern as light strikes the backside of this material, causing the building to really have a completely changing quality morning to afternoon to evening. So a section of the building is this, and again the reliquary wall I mentioned is here. The wood you can see obviously there. And the idea was to make this a space that was like a glowing wooden lantern. And so each of these pieces of wood, which is structural, are canted relative to the sun. So the sun strikes one face and bounces onto its neighbor and causes the wood itself to glow very softly, to make this a very softly glowing volume and one of great warmth. And the idea is then further to make an idea of the circle also metaphorically in the section. So we begin at the main entry here. I mentioned the baptismal font. Directly below the baptismal font, in fact, extruding that shape downward is the entry to the mausoleum. From the mausoleum, from the entry, you descend, as opposed to the ascent to the cathedral, you descend to the catafalque, which is here in the crypt, directly below the altar itself. So we have the idea of entry, absolution, the alpha wall directly facing south, the oculus ceiling, which is Vesca Pisces shape, and then ended by the omega wall directly behind the altar, and then finally coming down into the mausoleum itself. So the idea is both a physical and metaphorical idea of using the circle to define both the geometry and the structure of this as well as its principal metaphors. So here's the actual plan as we've developed it. Again, with the altar as the center, the circle and the square in Asian symbology. This is heaven, the circle, and the square is earth. And with glass around the altar, bringing light directly down from the sanctuary into the mausoleum below it. And then from the altar, the main axis, which connects again to the baptismal font. And then as you think of the entry coming up the pilgrim's pathway, you come in on axis directly to the baptismal font, and then you physically and metaphorically turn. So you're turning from the world of the secular into that of the sacred at the baptismal font, and proceed up the aisle, the altar, the tabernacle directly beyond that in axis. And then from the altar, emanating the side aisles are radial, connecting the altar to the city and to the lake, and connecting also the reliquary wall itself with light, especially in the morning, raking these walls, coming up the altar, coming up the aisleways toward the altar itself, creating a very strong connection. Here you see an early model study of this idea. So, furthering these notions was really considering the nature of light itself, where it's coming from, and its qualities within space. This is an early study model, just of cardboard, looking actually on the site at what we call, again, the alpha wall. The shape of these triangles are there for primarily a pragmatic reason, which is that this wall, in order to bring these geometries together, actually transforms from a circle at the base to a point at the top where it meets the Vesca Pisces ellipse. So it's a very complicated form, which can be resolved by a triangle, a diagrid we call it. So this diagrid we've opened at this side, facing south, like a flower might open its leaves, its petals to welcome the sun. And so from this very, very strong sun, we have the opportunity then to create both these interesting patterns within the building, but also to reflect light back onto the neighboring pieces to make it a very spectral, beautiful piece. It changes, of course, throughout the day. The oculus ceiling piece, again, was designed with the same diagrid idea, but transforming its geometry to send light down on the altar and also onto the omega wall to rake it with light from the south. And these are early studies actually in our office in the studio, looking at using again cardboard and paper to study the effect of light coming through this piece directly from above, in this case from fluorescent light, of course, but to understand again how we can make transparency, as you see here in these perforations, and opacity to make this really effective. Framing the altar and the omega wall are two acoustic panels that are tipped outward into the space that reflect, designed with our acoustician, the voices of the choir and the clergy into the cathedral itself. This is an early study then of the organ, of the pipes that will go on top of this. The organ, this is actually a more completed study looking at ways of making the organ also part of the vocabulary of this place of modest connection with nature. Thinking of the pipes themselves as almost a small grove of poplar trees that are more or less organic in their positioning and rectangular or square in their shapes, and with the trumpets and others made in metal. I was actually not sure this would work, but Laterno from Canada, who are organ builders, when I mentioned this, were very enthusiastic actually, because pipe organs have throughout history actually been made of wood. In fact, it produces a very warm sound. So a view then of, again, a model study from the entry past the baptismal font toward the main sanctuary, and looking at the altar itself. Now I mentioned the altar is, again, the circle and the square. The idea is that light will both come from the sanctuary and then into the mausoleum. This is a section below it. As well as in the evening, as we light the opposite way, light actually strikes this edge of the white altar and makes it a glowing element in the space. So it appears that the light within the sanctuary in the evening really emanates from the altar itself. One minor setback is I had hoped to make this glass entirely clear, so when you're in the crypt and mausoleum looking up, you could see this connection directly with the sanctuary. Unfortunately, Bishop Vigneron was a little nervous about this with a sense of fear of heights, and said, I can't do this. I will be totally confused at a mass. So we had to make it translucent glass, but it's still, the light is still makes that connection. So one of the defining qualities of the space is the fact that it is a place that's meant to welcome many cultures, as I mentioned. Mass are given in many languages, in both for Chinese, for Hispanics, for Filipinos, Vietnamese, and so consequently it's a place of a very multicultural place. And the idea was to make this place one that welcomes everyone, that is receptive to your own cultural backgrounds. But within this, so therefore there is no linear stained glass story of the story of the Bible. But instead, we have made a singular focus on the omega wall, we call it, again at the end, which is an image of Christ that you see here. And this was a huge, huge issue, and one of great concern for me, of course, was how we make this and what it can be. And originally I thought that, well, we could make pixels painted on the metal, because there's an internal metal panel and glass beyond it. It seemed a little thin, so the idea was really to make pixels by actually admitting light, by cutting holes in this metal, letting light come through to form the image. Seemed interesting and possible, but technologically difficult, because you can imagine a guy with a drill bit trying to do this. And so we hit upon finally a very simple idea, really, which is use a laser. And so there are many places within this building that would use computer technology to actually create connections to antiquity. So in this case, we've used the laser cutter to make pixels. We knew it would work conceptually. We'd never seen it done exactly, but I convinced the bishop we could do this. And so but I wasn't sure what Christ really should look like. And so I asked the bishop, and he said, Bishop Vigneron suggested we should go to the west portal of Chartres Cathedral, and we'll find this bas-relief made in the 12th century. I was reminded today, not the 6th. And that this could be the foundations of the image itself. So we found a digital recreation of this piece and translate that through a computer technology into pixels, bits and bytes, and then finally into a grayscale that you can see here with a series of openings from 1/4 of an inch to 1 1/4 inch that form this image. We did tests with paper. We did tests finally with the laser cutter itself. If you're in the back of the room, you can probably see this very clearly. If you're in the front, it looks like just a series of circles. But we put this up. We actually did a laser cut piece in plastic in our office. You see it was too big. We had to poke it through the ceiling. But we put it directly in front of our conference room with tracing paper to affect the translucent glass appearance, and said it works. And so we brought the bishop over, and he said, fine, let's proceed. So we did a mock-up finally, sent the material to our computer files to Germany. They fabricated the first 2 pieces. We went to the construction site a day like this, not a cloud in the sky, and I became very worried when I told the Bishop Vigneron here, who were looking at a sort of early mock-up or one of the early pieces by the artist Andrew Bonnet, one of the Stations of the Cross. And this day was, as I said, very cloudless, and I said this could be a problem because this will only work if we have light most strongly from behind in a rather darkened interior. And sure enough, we went and stood there, and sure enough, here are the first 2 pieces. We were supposed to be seeing this. And what we saw instead were these blobs of metal because of this was an architectural career rapidly going downhill. The contractor said, this morning it actually looked pretty good. And so we had to find a way to cast a shadow. So we found this 12-ton dumpster, hooked it to the tower crane, lifted it 30 feet in the air. It cast a shadow across the image. And difficult to see here, but actually the image literally leapt from this material, and this was an architectural career regained at that moment. And truly, if there was a miracle in this process, that was certainly one of them. But we've used this technology in other places in the building, one of which is the front doors. I thought that we couldn't afford bronze cast doors in the beginning, therefore we'd use simple wooden doors like mission-style doors. I found those were very expensive, so I knew they'd be with us for a couple hundred years probably. So the idea was to not have a standard door, but rather to design this also to reflect the concepts of the building. The arc you see here are the arcs taken from the baptismal font, forming this Vesca Pisces shape here where they come together, the 2 pairs of doors. And the door handles, which reflect this idea of the Vesca Pisces, or liminal space, the space of transformation. It is based, we decided to use it throughout this building, various geometries, including a Fibonacci sequence, which we find in a number of organic phenomena, including the sunflower seed pod you see here. We use the sunflower seed pod as the basis for design of these door handles, which you can see using, again, our computer to take this double spiral and bend it both in plan and in section to reflect, again, the arc of the baptismal font. From this, we made the computer print out for us in 3 dimensions of plastic pieces like this that we could actually test and make sure that it felt appropriate. And from that, we sent this then, these are simply styrene pieces printed out by the computer full scale. We sent these computer files to the fabricator in Los Angeles. They proceeded to do the same thing. They basically printed a 3D styrene model, and then they did a lost wax technique in which they essentially cast ceramic castings around this plastic, melted it out as you would have melted wax, about 500 years ago, and then poured stainless steel into this and broke it out, and here are handles. I had sort of imagined a much more high-tech process of using computer millers to make this, so it was interesting to me to see this 1,000-year-old process used to create these pieces, and happily showed up literally the day before the dedication Mass. Throughout the building, text is very much a part of informing the sense of the place, and so we've worked with our liturgical committee and the bishop to develop the text quotes from the Bible that are at each of the major thresholds in the building and form the basis around the baptismal font, around the altar, and so forth. So there's always text is part of the experience of this place. The building was under construction. You can see here the use again of these tensile and compressive elements of wood and very, very thin members of steel, which make this extremely lightweight structure. This, after 2 years of pouring concrete, went up very, very quickly. But for me at least, very importantly, is it also began immediately to affirm that in fact the light that we'd hoped for, that you can see in this photograph on the left, really began to work even in this condition, that you can see the way that light in fact will inform this wood and through the reliquary wall to make a space that was extremely light became very much present. So the community was extremely, this created a lot of interest when this building very quickly attained this form, and was a lot of disappointment when we put the glass up. But to me the glass was a very, very critical part of this because again, with the use of this type of material, we're able to create a new reading of architecture, in which you see it both in this sort of translucent form you see here as a lantern during the day, and also when light strikes it directly, it becomes much more of a solid element. So it's constantly changing as you see it, as you move around it, and also throughout the day. And inside, of course, there's a surprise, because the transformation here is from lightness and luminosity as a veil to one very much of a connection with the earth, from the very, very massive reliquary wall to the lightness of the wood. All the pieces are put together in small scale so that there's a sense of, again, our connection with humankind, not with a machine. And light, again, is seen both in its very ephemeral ways, but also in its very solid ways, as we see here at the alpha wall. And you can see, again, the baptismal font directly below this at the point of entry, with the screens here pulled shut in this case. Here you also see the relationship between the baptismal font and the one of the two reconciliation rooms. Each of these reliquary wall chapels and special rooms have a color that represent the qualities of his place, or blue liturgical colors that we've seen in earlier presentations today. So you can see that light and the experience of these places can really change and be transformed from spring to fall and from morning to afternoon. And the idea is to make, again, this very present. So the Omega Wall, I still wasn't really totally certain it was going to work until it actually went up. I didn't tell the bishop this, but I was very happy. I was in China actually the day when this went up, and I got a cell phone call from the bishop, who was just ecstatic because this was in fact really working. The importance here is not to make an element in this piece of art that is always absolutely clear like a poster. The idea is to make it ephemeral, to make it come and go. So literally, as the light goes, the image goes. When the light comes, the image comes. When light breaks across it, the image becomes softer. When it becomes more dim within, it becomes very, very powerful. And it also, you can see, we let the mullions behind, which are simply, these are actually projected on the image, to actually become part of it. So it really is completely embedded with the architecture. It's inseparable from the architecture itself. So the idea was to take something from the 12th century, which is seen through light and shadow, and transform it through 21st century technology into a veil, in which it's understood in a very profoundly different way. You can see how it actually disappears from certain views. So the oculus ceiling, or the Vesca Pisces you see here, is one that's lit during the day, and the evening, of course, is also lit as a lantern. You see the qualities of light raking the space and the reliquary wall itself, the art. Again, deeply raking light in these spaces to create a sense of intimacy. The sacred oils, the entry to the mausoleum directly under the baptismal font, ascending downward to the catafalque with light coming from the altar above. Stained glass actually from the original cathedral, which was destroyed in the earthquake, and views in the evening where the building becomes reciprocal, becomes a lantern actually to the community. And unexpectedly things happen, like, for example, in this case, the image of the Christ figure is actually projected through these pixels onto the translucent glass beyond it, so it becomes a reciprocal image on the building itself. So for me, the really moving part of this, of course, is the way it's used. The Pilgrim's Pathway you see here in processional, the complete connection between us as human beings and the clergy in this case to the architecture, the dedication of Mass in which oils were placed upon the altar and then subsequently made stations of cross in the concrete, which of course begin to absorb and eventually become absorbed completely into the building itself. The use of graphics again in ways that aren't revealed immediately, that Andrew, the apostles are shown, but they're shown in ways that you have to, it takes a moment to unravel it. Finally, the organ was just installed about 3 months ago, and with a beautiful public concert. And just to conclude, to say that, that any of us as architects know that architecture is different than art. It's a very collaborative social process, and anything like this involves work with many hands. And so this project was, like all of our work, is part of a very, very talented group of individuals who make it a privilege to go to work every day. But this, as I said in the beginning, was for all of us who are involved in this, a truly profound experience, one that is unlikely to be repeated for us, many of us in our careers, but one that we found to be one that's truly affects our life and our thinking about our future work. So with that, I'll conclude. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Craig. And let's now take a 10-minute break. I'm a little afraid to let you go, but I'm going to trust you'll come back. We have work to do, so come back in 10 minutes. Please bring me your questions on a written form, a little card, a scrap of paper.